Welcome to How to Find More Direct Clients Than You Can Poke a Stick At podcast, a mix of both solo episodes and expert interviews. Our ideal listener is an early career, ambitious, and passionate online language services provider. She is committed to professional growth and achieving success in the fiercely competitive translation and interpreting industry. She balances multiple responsibilities with resourcefulness, values mentorship, is open to learning, and investing in her professional development journey. She embraces technology and seeks to optimize workflow, eager to connect with like-minded peers and build out her professional network. She is determined to overcome challenges and become a sought-after freelance translator. And here's your host, medical translator and translator business mentor, Jason Willis-Lee.
Gabriel Fairman is a visionary in design and operational excellence, passionate about solving problems at their core to drive growth through process efficiency. He believes in empowering people by fostering a sense of purpose and belonging to achieve peak performance. With a commitment to open communication and managing risks, Gabriel shows up to win and never settles for less. And welcome to another episode of How to Find More Direct Clients, the podcast that makes digital marketing both easier and more enjoyable by blending smart business strategies with just the right dose of tech. I'm your host, Jason Willis-Lee, digital marketing specialist, and today I'm very excited and honored to introduce my special guest. His name is Gabriel Fairman, and he is the CEO of BureauWorks. So he has a very dynamic take on the language service provision industry. Gabriel, thank you so much for coming on to the show. How are you today?
My pleasure, Jason. Thank you so much. Really doing great and happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Can you just start by sharing a bit about your business journey and BureauWorks in particular, and where you think the T&I industry is heading right now? We're obviously very, very AI centric place. Where are we heading from 2025 to 2030, for example?
Well, I began in the space as a translator, then developed an agency. From the very beginning, for me, everything was as much as I loved language, it was really an information management problem. And as we evolved, I got more and more into the technology problem. We began developing tech in 2015. By 2021, we pivoted into a tech company, and that's what we've been doing since. So we build translation management systems, in this case, BureauWorks, and I think that gives me like an interesting angle as far as like we really consider the translators the main persona for our platform. They're the ones who, in the end, spend countless hours a day doing the work. And as far as where we are and where things are heading, at least from what we see is, so we're seeing edit distance go down very significantly. So the last report we have is edit distance is on average 11.17%. So that means that on average, translators in BureauWorks are only changing 11.17% of the content they're seeing, right? Doesn't mean that they're changing with language. That number can be very deceiving, though. Maybe they're changing little things, but very relevant things that would make the translation, to be terrible without that. So, but it's still, that number is going to become lower and lower, and that's, in my opinion, inevitable. But I don't see the translations themselves going away. I do see them morphing into something different. So once you have that initial layer of the translation established, that's not going to be anymore the end of the translation process. That's going to be the beginning of a deeper curatorial, editorial process. And that's where we're focusing on, is really giving people the tools and the abilities to curate that content.
I heard you speak at the recent AI in Translation Summit. Yours was one of the best presentations I listened to. I had quite a few. And you said something that really resonated with me enough to convert it into a reel on my Instagram. And I said this, and I'll just remind you what you said. You said language will be an enabler of revenue and consumer behavior. Could you elaborate on that and just explain how effective localization has a direct impact on revenue and consumer behavior?
Yeah, I think the question actually goes deeper. Like, I think so. From a philosophical perspective, right? You had the structuralists and the from a language perspective, and the structuralists they typically understood that the language was a reflection of the world, right? So you have the signifiers and the signified. So the word chair was signifying the object chair on the other end, right? And in this paradigm, languages could be right or wrong because maybe it's representing the world correctly, incorrectly, and maybe it's adhering to grammar rules, not adhering to grammar rules. So that's one school of thought. Another school of thought are, let's say, the post-structuralists, and for them, and I'm just very grotesquely oversimplifying, but language is about getting things done, and it's about not necessarily a one-to-one correspondence with the world, but kind of like a world unto itself. And that changes things very significantly because, like, let's say, for instance, if I'm translating an email that you wrote and I'm working in a more structuralist perspective, I'm going to try to adhere to your words as best as possible. That's going to be, fidelity to the original translation is going to be something very important.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be like a structuralist approach. A post-structuralist approach would be, well, what is Jason trying to do with this email? Is he trying to motivate someone? Is he trying to sell something? Is he trying to get something? Is he trying to, what's the goal here? And my goal now is going to be to help you achieve that goal. Whether or not I'm going to be, closer or further away from the language you're using, I'm going to be closer to your goals. And that's typically something very difficult to be done at scale because it's very challenging to measure quality from that perspective. It's always been very challenging. So people revert back to managing quality in translations through a very structuralist approach. So, let's talk about error typology and let's talk about whether it's a grammar error or mistranslation, etc. But now we're getting to a world where you have the tools to actually measure the effectiveness of any given translation. So maybe I translate a blog page, you translate your blog page, but maybe your blog page is performing better. Maybe you're getting more time spent on your page than mine. Maybe you're getting fewer people bouncing off the page. Maybe you're getting better scores, more keywords indexed. So something you're doing is better than what I'm doing. And now we can measure those things and we can actually prove that, let's say, a quote unquote good translation, it can generate more value than a quote unquote bad translation. Again, I think the challenge is we're not talking about linguistic quality, we're talking about performance quality. And I think that's something very difficult for most people to grasp and not grasp, they can to handle, particularly because most translators are very schooled in the idea of language as something highly technical. And that's what the background that most people come from is, language is an art and it has to be respected and it has to be, flawless and meticulous. And, whether, they're connoisseurs of grammar and all the intricacies of language. And in my opinion, that part is going to become less relevant. The part that's going to become more relevant is the outcome being achieved successfully? And how do you iterate on that? How do you, create the original translation, but then build on that so that it's continuously getting better? I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but that's kind of how I see it.
Let's turn to BureauWorks. What do you see as BureauWorks' role over the next few years in helping businesses unlock new markets and communicating with diverse audiences? And then we'll give our audience a couple of reasons to buy BureauWorks. But what is the role of the software effectively in this AI centric, AI powered marketplace at the moment?
So I think the role is going to be different for different kinds of users. So it's going to be a different role for a translator than it is to be, for instance, for an enterprise buyer. But I think in general, like the way we see it is getting a really interesting translation from some machine translation, large language model hybrid is something that's already happening, right? But that's only the starting point. Then let's say you have changes that you want to make to that translation. How do you store those changes? How do you recall those changes? How do you learn from those changes? How do you leverage those changes? And how do you implement those changes at scale? I think those are the questions that we try to answer at BureauWorks. So really, like, let's say from the translator's perspective, is instead of working like with a machine translation that's not learning from you, you're working with a dynamic model that's reacting to your changes, learning, getting better, getting smarter, and closer to how you would say things, which really cuts down on your time and you don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about like a prompt and a response. You don't have to think about a large language model. They're just there working as agents in the background. So they're alerting you maybe of a potential terminology mistake they may be committing, maybe a mistranslation. The idea is unburdening the user so that the user can focus on the higher level things. So, for instance, is the overall tone the tone that I want to be using? Is the strategy, is the delivery strategy the delivery strategy that I want to be using? Are the brand keywords the ones that I want to be using? And did I research, let's say, SEO to make sure that the SEO for this translation is what I want to be using? So I think the idea is if you unburden users to focus less on carrying the language building blocks from one place to another, then you're creating the opportunity to focus on where you take it from there. So that's how we see our tech.
How does the BureauWorks tech stack up to the CAT tools we've had on the market? We all use STL Trados, we all use MOQ. I've used cloud-based applications, MemSource. How does BureauWorks compare to those, and how does it compare specifically to another one on the market, which is WordScope, which integrates ChatGPT? Could you just give us a compare and contrast so that our audience can feel the value proposition from BureauWorks itself?
Sure. And I'm by no means an expert on any other tools other than ours, so I don't know them deeply. From a high level perspective, every single one of these tools is the same. You get files in, files out. The difference is in the details. And I would say, as far as details go, for instance, BureauWorks supports over 54 different file types. So whether it's PDF files or video files, whatever kinds of files, we support that. I think from an experience perspective and a software architecture perspective, we focus a lot on speed and reliability. So I think the way we deliver BureauWorks, even though it's cloud-based, and let's say maybe your data is residing in AWS East 1 in Virginia, even if you're translating from Japan or someone far away, your experience in BureauWorks is going to be very fast. And we believe that to be super important. It has to be very seamless. The other thing is that because the learning is happening in the background, you don't have to worry about prompt and response. You're just experiencing an engine that's getting closer and closer to your style and your way of doing things as you move along. So the goal is to create just a very seamless, very simple and direct experience for any user within BureauWorks. Like I said, I think in terms of these tools, I would say the main difference is our tech is very fresh, not just because we began developing in 2015, but we refactor continuously. So we're always using the latest and the most advanced components available to build our tech, which makes it just a different flavor. It's going to be faster, it's going to be simpler, and it's going to be more effective.
You said that BWX processes video files. Does that mean
Yes.
that it can do MP3 and MP4 files? So is that possible?
Correct. Yeah, you can, yeah, provided that you upload also the SRT, yeah, you can translate videos using video preview and seeing how the subtitles are looking like while you translate.
Okay, man, that's a standalone feature just there, I think. I'm not sure the other programs can do that. What about what is your position on positioning language services as part of a broader business strategy? How do you think the next 5 years are going to go? Those of us who are riding this wave and surviving, and I'm thinking people with a strong niche, like medicine, like law, but who are leaning into the tech. So the people who are surviving, I think, are embracing AI, not running away from it. The people leaving the industry, I think, are a little afraid of tech and they've already, thrown in the towel. What do you think? What do you think should be our? I'm going to change the question slightly. How do you think we can best ride this tech storm into the next decade and survive as LSPs? Because not everyone will survive. I know of a lot of people who've left the industry. They've told me, and I can see a lot of people running scared of tech. And I feel myself, and I'm not the most, tech savvy person out there. I'm more of a technophobe, but I do try and lean into the tech because I think that's a necessary way to survive. How do you think we can best survive? I mean, maybe listeners are thinking, hey, I don't use BureauWorks, and maybe I should be. How best can we survive these next just 5 years and taking us up to 2030?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jason. I think my, my opinion is the first part that's really hard to manage is the sense of loss and anger. And I understand that. Like, if you developed a whole business, a whole career, learning how to translate, let's say, in a word processor or in a CAT tool or in a certain framework, and you have to change that, and that's against your will. That's not something that you decided. That can be very, triggering, and that can generate a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot of frustration. And I think if you're in that space, it's just going to be really difficult because it's hard to, change if that's what you're experiencing. And again, I acknowledge those emotions. I think that they're legitimate emotions, but they're not very productive emotions. So for me, the first step is to move from that emotional space to an emotional space where it's like, okay, this is happening. I'm not gonna be in denial. I'm gonna embrace this. So I think, and that shift is, in my opinion, the hardest and the most significant shift is embracing the idea that you can't fight something that's so much bigger. We're not talking about just large language models. We're talking about the evolution of a techno-capitalist economy. And it's been like this for the past few hundred years. It's like whatever is most available, most powerful at any given moment gets adopted, right? So people stop writing for the typewriter, people stop typing for the computer. Pretty soon people are going to stop typing for the large language models, but they're still going to do other things, but they're not going to be typing necessarily. And I think accepting that maybe you're going to give up that part that is so dear to you and that you've developed over all these years, that's hard. And it's also particularly hard because then the other part is completely unknown, right? Because it's like, okay, so now my sense of self-worth isn't coming anymore from the fact that I can translate words anymore. It's coming from something else, but I don't know what that something else still looks like. And in my opinion, like realistically, right now where we are, like we're talking about being able to work more as an editor and less as a translator. So you're not no longer translating, you're editing. I think, in my opinion, editing is actually a much cooler thing. It's not by coincidence that, like, for instance, in journalism, a newspaper editor is the one who makes the heavy bucks. The author doesn't make as much as the editor. No, pretty much nowhere. So editing is a very cool thing. But a lot of translators don't like editing. They actually like the idea of translating. So that's a hard thing to overcome, like embracing the fact that editing is here and it's just undeniably a much more effective way to translate than translating. So, and then if you're looking at editing, then what's the most effective way to edit? And that's where I like our approach, the context sensitive approach, because it leverages all of your edits. So if you change something towards something that's more informal, it's going to become lean towards informality moving forward. So, or vice versa, if you change towards formal and so on. So, I like this dynamic approach, but I think, from a personal perspective, embracing editing is a good place to begin with. But that's just a starting point. I think that after that, people have to begin to think about whether they're going to become either subject matter experts as editors. So maybe they're going to be like an editor for legal patents in Germany, or maybe they're going to be an editor for chemical engineering in Japan. Those are subject matters expertises, and those are going to be valuable in my opinion because, again, even assuming that you have parity, that like whatever the editor is looking at is perfect from legal perspectives, compliance perspectives, people are still going to want someone to be looking at things. So humans, in my opinion, are going to continue to be the owners of the language. They're going to be looking at it in a different capacity. Now, if you're not a subject matter expert, the other opportunity for you is to become what I would call like a language wizard, which is someone who knows how to craft language in just the right way to achieve a certain outcome. So tweak the words and find better SEO and find better things here or there to make sure that the overall approach makes sense, right? And I think that is about iteration, and it becomes closer to the art of copywriting, but taking into account like so many different information sources, right? At the same time, taking into account SEO, taking into account analytics, taking into account brand guidelines, etc. So in my opinion, that's where it's going to like bifurcate. Either you're a subject matter expert or you're a language expert. And I think as long as you're in one of those two bandwagons, you should be mm, in a good position, in my opinion.
How is Bureau? Yeah, 100% with you on post editing. We're now seeing a lot more of that. Just before we came on to record, I accepted an editing project from a client, which is due on Tuesday. So this is couldn't be more topical. How is BureauWorks positioned uniquely for post editing? Does it do anything that we haven't seen before? And then could you explain, this is from my wonderful training on the program, which was given by Viveta Gene. She was the representative. She's in Athens, but we had a very nice meeting. And she explained a function called translation smells. Could you
Mhm.
talk about the post-editing functions and then the translation smells, just so we get a full comprehensive
Yeah.
picture?
So I don't like to use the idea of post editing because for most people, post editing, for me, post editing isn't a pleasant experience. Like I'll pre-translate a file and then it'll already be translated, and then I have to edit after the fact something that already has been translated.
Yeah.
In BureauWorks, you can do something called context sensitive editing. So the context sensitive editing, the first thing is that it's learning from your edits as you move along. So like let's say, you're describing BureauWorks as a platform as opposed to a system. It's going to learn from that edit. And every time that it's referencing the idea of a platform, it's going to call it platform and not system. It's going to learn from your edits. It's going to learn from your terminology. And that makes, in my opinion, the editing process so much more joyful because it's not about fixing the same things endlessly throughout the translation, but rather really focusing on imposing your voice, your tone, your style. From the smells perspective, this is the smells is an agent. So it's working on the background if you have it turned on. And it's looking for instance, semantic issues with your translations and runtime. So potential grammar issues, potential spelling issues, potential mistranslations, potential omissions, additions, cultural misappropriations, gender bias, very wide range of different kinds of situations that come up during a translation. So smells is actively warning the translator as far as what could be potentially wrong with the translation.
Okay. How much is BureauWorks, Gabriel? How much
For
does it cost?
translators, it starts at $19 a month. So it's relatively inexpensive.
It is. That is a very affordable price point. Um, what's the best business advice you've ever received? Or maybe so from a mentor, or maybe it's advice you've given to a mentee, somebody you've mentored. But I'm thinking more from one of your mentors. What's the best business advice you've ever received?
For me, the best business advice is not to take advice.
That's a good one. That's a
I
good
honestly
one.
think that like every every journey is different. Every journey is different. And I think the idea of an advice starts from the false premise that there is a similarity in the journeys. And you could tell me your advice and it could be great advice from your perspective. I could tell you my advice, could be great advice from my perspective, but it won't necessarily carry over well. So I think the advice would be, even if you listen to what different people are saying, I would consider my own experience as the first and foremost aspect that needs to be considered. So for instance, if I'm a translator, as an example, I wouldn't worry so much about what other people are saying. I would worry about what's working and not working for me, and maybe I'm having a great time with working with context sensitivity in BureauWorks and I'm making more money and that's great. I'm going to do more of it. And maybe I'm not, and I'm going to do less of it. But for me, it makes sense to do things that do more of what's working and do less of what's not working. And I think that particularly in our time and age, it's very easy to get lost in so much information and disinformation and focus very little on your actual experience and outcomes. And that's what I believe is the most important part is, um, you know, doesn't matter what other people are saying. Some people are going to say that it's great. Some people are going to say that it's terrible. The question is, what is it for you and what can you make of it? And I think that is a very important question. And that would be, let's say, the advice is like focus on your own experience and your own needs and challenges and successes.
How does context sensitivity work from a technical point of view? Is it just a question of saving the edits and the program gets wiser and more intelligent next time? Or is there something more than that?
No, there's a lot of engineering complexity. I mean, there's a RAG translation framework that we've created that performs searches across the knowledge bases that you've established for your different clients, ranks these searches based on quality that we've derived from metadata. Then it works with a large language model from an intellectual and analytical perspective to evaluate those rankings and decisions, then proposes to you as a translator what makes most sense for that given context, and then based on your edits, retrains that knowledge base. So it's a continuous loop that's using this RAG translation framework, which makes it very predictable, very easy to use, very different than working with a large language model that can be very difficult to train and ensure like the same kind of outcome every single time.
You've obviously been in the SaaS space for a number of years, since 2015, SaaS, software as a service. What shortcomings do you see in the market, or what pain points do you have specifically as a SaaS entrepreneur? What keeps you up at night? What's your pillow talk problem? And how can we best patch that up in the next 5 years? This is just as kind of an entrepreneurial question.
Everything keeps me up at night. I think it's hard. I think I just think in general, everything is changing very quickly, and what makes sense today may not make sense tomorrow. And I constantly question everything. I question our approach. I question our pricing. I question absolutely everything that we do.
When I say the word AI to you, or the term artificial intelligence, what's the first word that comes into your mind? Just a one-word answer.
Think about AI, efficiency.
That's a good one. And what is the biggest myth? I like busting myths that people come to me. I see a lot of limiting beliefs. I see a lot of one of the things I try to do is to be let's call it a digital contrarian, an online contrarian. If people are running this way to the left, and then my immediate thing is to just run to the right. And then just the last question. What is the biggest myth that people sort of come up with, a limiting belief?
I think a very limiting belief is, going back to my other point, is just over reliance on other people's experiences, and believing that other people know better and have I think one's own personal experience is a lot more valuable than most people attribute value to. I think that in my opinion.
Gabriel, what's the best platform? How can my audience connect with you? What's the best platform to go?
So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and very easy to find me there. Gabriel Fairman. Everybody is welcome to check out our videos also on YouTube. We publish quite a few. We have a very interesting blog as well, but we're pretty easy to find.
Okay. Any special offer for the audience? Is there any discount code they can type in, or let's just say there's a bunch of
absolutely. We'll send you over a discount code that you can add in the description, and
fantastic.
We're going to give at least 20% off for the first 3 months.
That's very kind of you. Great. All right. Let's wrap it up for this week's episode of How to Find More Direct Clients. Stay tuned for more engaging discussions on the ever-evolving, as you've seen, landscape of language and digital marketing. Until next time, stay on your game, and remember to future-proof your career in the AI digital era. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Here's a fun fact about Jason. Jason played cello in the Bath Symphony Orchestra in the UK. Thanks for tuning in to the How to Find More Direct Clients Than You Can Poke a Stick At podcast. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, why not head over to www.entrepreneurialtranslator.com to access all our tools and resources to monetize and future-proof your freelance translation business. And don't forget to hit the plus button in Apple Podcasts or iTunes, or subscribe in Spotify to be notified when new episodes drop. For regular tips and insights, business strategy, or marketing techniques straight to your inbox, please sign up at www.entrepreneurialtranslator.com.